Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this afternoon's webinar on keeping calm during the storm, hurricane season, and your disaster recovery strategy. Obviously, we realize with the tragedy going on in Houston right now that the timing of this webinar is a little unfortunate, so we just want to say first off that our thoughts and concerns are with all the folks dealing with that terrible mess in Texas and Louisiana right now, and our thoughts are with you, and we wish you all the best for anyone who attending has family or they themselves are affected by that tragedy. Our thoughts are absolutely with you. So that being said, we just have a few housekeeping items before we get started today. Should you have any questions during the presentation, we are going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to enter your questions into the dashboard area of your console, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar as best that we can and try to address all the questions. Also, we will be recording this webinar today, and we will be sending a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck and any supplemental handouts for the webinar to you following the presentation today. And speaking of handouts, if anyone is interested, we have a great companion white paper that goes along with the presentation today on hurricanes and your disaster recovery strategy. You can easily download that from the handouts area of the console as well. And as I said, we'll certainly be emailing that to all attendees following the presentation as well. Without further ado, today joining us from Carbonite, we have both Jamie Zajac and Ray Sullivan, who are on the product marketing teams here at Carbonite. Jamie manages our endpoint solutions, and Ray is our product marketing manager for all things high availability, disaster recovery, backup, and endpoint. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jamie Zajac, and she is going to kick off the presentation with some great tips and suggestions on how you can manage the rise of natural disasters and hurricanes and how that might affect your DR strategy. So with that, Jamie, please take it away.
Thanks, Ethan, and welcome everyone. As Ethan introduced, we're going to be talking about weather's impact on your business and how to create an effective disaster recovery strategy to keep your business operating as efficiently as possible when a disaster strikes. So we'll go over some weather phenomenon and some statistics as to how storms are happening and how that's been evolving. And then we'll also talk a lot about how you, and combined with your IT teams and your internal operations teams, can create an effective strategy and some important things to note as you're doing that. So my name is Jamie Zajac. My background is as an aviation meteorologist and as a software engineer. I currently work for Carbonite as a director of product for our endpoint protection and small business product line. In my past careers, I've focused a lot in the weather space, working for a sister company to the Weather Channel called The Weather Company, and working to design products for airlines. A huge part of my focus was on designing high availability systems to keep airlines flying despite significant weather events. It was really fun, and it gave me a great foundation to come to Carbonite and work on disaster recovery, high availability, backup, and all sorts of data protection. So we're currently in a very interesting period of time, weather-wise. Large storms are becoming more and more frequent. As temperatures on our planet rise, it has a snowball effect with the weather. This leads to more air rising and falling. This leads to higher temperatures, more diurnal cooling, and ultimately more atmospheric instability. In a lot of weather speak, what that translates to for you is that this is starting to change weather patterns altogether. What we've been seeing is that, in the news and in the weather forecast, is that there's more and more weather phenomenons and more severe storms happening across the U.S. and across the world. So for the longest time, I've always heard people talking about how they don't live in a severe weather area, or that severe weather is so rare that it isn't something they plan for in their business. Or if they do plan for it, maybe they have an evacuation plan for their company, how to keep their employees safe during the storm. Maybe it's something that they're required to post in their building. But it's not necessarily a full comprehensive disaster recovery plan. But as you can see, as we're experiencing more and more severe weather, the probability of having a significant weather event in your area is becoming more and more frequent. So some of the graphs here are actually showing you that if you look at the number of billion-dollar impacting storms, so the really, really big impactful storms, they're happening more and more frequently. So 20 years ago, this might have been 5 events or so per year. And now we're seeing upwards of 9 or 10 events. And I think this year we've already hit 10 significant billion-dollar weather events, and the year is just over halfway over. So there's still a lot of area left, and this means that a lot of people are going to still continue to experience severe weather. So whether it's a hurricane, such as what the people in Texas and in the South are dealing with today, or a tornado in the Midwest, or an ice storm in the Northeast, a fire in the West, the chances of severe weather are increasing and becoming higher and higher throughout the country and throughout the world. But there's more than just severe weather that you need to be concerned with. There are lots of other smaller, more localized events that can cause issues with your business. And that will lead to many of the issues that we're talking about in this presentation. So I certainly hope that no one here ever needs the content that we're talking about for recovering from a severe weather storm, but we'll walk through making a plan so that whether you're contending with a huge storm, such as a hurricane, or a more localized power outage in your data center, you'll have a good plan either way. So severe weather has several impacts on a business. These impacts can range based on the size of business, based on the type of weather, and the impacts change, but they're all real things that you need to contend with and understand. So first is power loss. From a single strike of lightning to a massive hurricane or flooding event, power loss is very impactful. If it's a short duration, perhaps a backup generator or backup power source will kick in and provide power to your business. But typically that only lasts so long, or you may only have a few mission-critical systems that have redundant power supplies. There are also a few different power loss scenarios to think about. There's what I call a good power loss event. Now bear with me on that one for a minute. A good power loss event is one where the systems power down gracefully and are ready to be powered back on. So I think about my laptop battery dying. My laptop is designed to have its battery run down to 0%, shut down gracefully, and once it receives some charge, it's able to power back up and recover and continue on. It's a very graceful shutdown. Then there are what I call the bad power loss events, ones where the systems shut down abruptly. I think about an ERP system that's hit with a power surge and powers off suddenly. In this case, applications may be left in an inconsistent state or even an irrecoverable state. This is how data can become corrupted on them. So we'll get back to this in a minute, but it means that you have more to deal with than simply getting the power back on and being ready to run your business again. With a power loss, the priority is typically restoring power and then assessing the situation. In the case of a good power loss event, one of those graceful shutdowns, you may just need to power back on the systems and be ready to go. That's great. In the case of a bad power loss event, you'll need to figure out how to restore your systems to a consistent and usable state, and then recreating the data that was lost between your last backup and the power loss time. So it gets much more complicated, and there's more to think about in those scenarios. Second is equipment and damage. This is a little bit more severe. Think about a flood in a server room or a computer room that you manage. The computers may not be recoverable in any state. It's not just about restoring power. Maybe a tornado or a hurricane has hit that area. But there's also much more routine events. A leaky roof, a heat wave in the area, and the air conditioning units fail, causing the server room to overheat, and many other scenarios that are very common and can happen easily to your business. When this happens, you need a plan for your equipment. How long will it take for you to order and receive new equipment? How long will it take when there are thousands of other people in your same geographic area requesting the same items due to their damage? I remember when an earthquake hit Japan, there was a huge run on hard drives for data centers that lasted months. Think about that. One company's inability to produce hard drives in their main factory caused a global shortage on drives. Small and medium businesses were not necessarily at the top of the list to receive 20 or 30 hard drives that they needed to rebuild their servers. Instead, huge companies, multinational companies, were putting all of their resources into obtaining as many of these drives as possible. That means you need a plan on how to handle equipment outages, where your only plan can't be the Dell 24-hour support contract. Third is a less technical consideration, and I think about my own family here. When there's a major weather event, I have to think about and prioritize the needs of my family with the needs of my business. What if a hurricane hits both my house and my business are without a roof at the same time, sustaining and taking on water damage. Which one do I deal with first? Do I put a roof over my family or over my business? What about my employees? What's their situation? Are their houses still intact? Same for my operations and my IT team. What about their families? These are some hard questions for you to ask yourself, and they're really complex factors to consider. I can't tell you what the answer is for balancing your personal and business commitments, but I can advise you to think through this and really come up with a plan that's going to balance both of these elements together. Though not the truly final impact, the final one that we'll discuss here is how to recover your operations and return back to normal operations, even perhaps semi-normal operations. Let's say that you run a chain of grocery stores. Do you need everything back up and running to resume operations? You can likely resume limited operations with some equipment and then bring the rest online over several days. But what systems do you bring online? What systems have dependencies on other systems that need to be brought online as well? What external dependencies do you have on third-party contractors, on third-party services, etc.? Identifying and categorizing your systems into recovery phases helps you get up and running, even in a limited capacity, faster, because you have the critical systems running quickly and additional systems brought online over time. So this obviously requires you to think through your business, think through your operations and your systems, the dependencies, your employees. Really think about all aspects of your business. Is it more important for you to get your online ordering platform running, or to get your phone systems up and running so your customers can call and find out if you're open? Is it more important to have a POS system running in your small business or medium-sized business, or to have your website up and running? Again, answers that are specific to your business, but certainly decisions that will be better made in advance than when you're frantically trying to return systems to order while balancing your personal and business commitments. And finally, what does readiness really mean? What are the steps to return a system to working order? What's important is to have a playbook defined for how you're going to handle your disaster recovery plan and execution. And that way, in the moment of a disaster and trying to recover, you're working through a predefined plan. You're working through your playbook. And then you're able to return to operations faster, ultimately minimizing the business impact of that weather event on how it's impacting you. Okay, so I've talked a lot here about the bad stuff, all the elements of the disaster. But let's turn the table a bit and talk about the recovery side. Let's go through the basics of disaster recovery and a disaster recovery plan. Disaster recovery is the ability to quickly recover lost company data in the event of a disaster or other data loss event. So we've talked a lot about weather, but there are other ways where data can be lost. Remember that power loss event? What if it was caused by someone tripping over a poorly wrapped power cord? What about spilling liquid on your server? What about a rogue script or a bug in a software that deletes tables from your ERP system or another critical database? What about ransomware or malware or a virus impacting your environment? There are so many more regular factors that can create a data loss event. It's not only severe weather that you need to be worried about. So once we all admit that a disaster is possible, and remember, from a weather perspective, it's actually more probable in the past 5 years than ever before in history, then you're going to want to define your response plan. A response plan contains several elements. First, it outlines your systems and data with a prioritization of your mission-critical systems, so identifying the recovery phases and the systems in each one. It's also going to identify the key people and their backups for returning to operations. Who's the owner for each system in your environment? Who can bring that system online? Who's the person that can verify that the system is functioning properly? Who's the backup person in case the primary person isn't able to assist in a time of need? So the plan should identify your restore plan. What systems and what dependencies constitute a minimal operating set? Some workers can work remotely for a period of time, even if your physical business has sustained damage. But what systems do they need to access to do their work? Are some items cloud-hosted systems and therefore can be accessed remotely? Do some systems need to be highly available with an automated failover and only seconds or minutes of downtime before they're restored? Are there people in different time zones or geographic areas that may not have even known the event happened. There's a lot to think about there when you consider your response plan and how to implement it properly. So as you create your plan, there are two disaster recovery jargon terms to be aware of. RTO stands for Recovery Time Objective. This is the time to bring a system back online. You should define an RTO for each system. You can generally assume that the shorter the RTO, the more costly it will be for you to achieve. For this reason, as you prioritize your systems, you should think about classifying some systems as mission critical and therefore requiring a very low RTO, maybe a few minutes or a few hours. For example, I work with engineering a lot. If our teams couldn't access our source code repository, it would mean that a lot of people couldn't work and couldn't get their job done. We'd want the system back online as soon as possible. But if our internal wiki or documentation site was down for a few days, it'd be kind of an annoyance, but it wouldn't stop people from making progress. So we're able to identify and classify systems as things that need a very short recovery time and systems that can sustain a longer period of outage. And then, in the event of a disaster, we can focus our resources on those mission-critical systems first, minimizing the impact to our business. So the second jargon term here is RPO. And RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective. This is the amount of time that you're willing to lose. So I'll use my engineering example again here for a minute. If all of my developers lost 1 hour of time coding, they could probably remember what they did and recreate it. If they lost 8 hours of work, that'd be a bit harder. If they lost a week of work, it'd take a long time to recreate all that work and get it up to speed. The recovery point objective is typically defined in time, marking how much data you're willing to lose. So think about this from a sales perspective. How many contracts, if they have to be reprocessed, how long would that take you to do? Would you remember all of the specific elements that you had to write into each one, what the customers had agreed to? The longer the period of time, the more work it's going to take you to recreate that, and the more expensive that data loss event will be for you to recover from. So in a perfect world, we'd all just use the state-of-the-art high availability for every system. The technology exists to do it. Let's just have everything automatically spin up in the cloud in the event of an outage. Perfect. If anything happens, I'll have a 5-minute RTO with a 10-second RPO, and I'll be good to go. Awesome. So it sounds great, but it'd be extremely expensive. Realistically, most people's disaster recovery plans need to balance their RTO and RPO goals with your budget. You'll need to implement the right solution for each system. So when we go through our products with you later in this presentation, keep this in mind. The right solution may be a combination of multiple products on different systems so that you can balance price and implementation complexity with the business criticality of your solution. So I hear some of you saying, but Jamie, what are the chances that my business gets hit with a hurricane? Remember, it isn't just severe weather events that cause problems. It's really any data loss event. Accidental data loss, human error, the infamous weather-related, system health and integrity checks, or many other things. And when severe enough, many businesses never reopen their doors after a catastrophic data loss event. System damage, recovery costs, customer impacts, balancing personal and business responsibilities, and many of the items we've discussed can just be too much. So there's two types of companies. There's the companies that have experienced data loss, and there's companies that will experience data loss. No company is immune. So we have some additional statistics, and this comes from a Spiceworks survey that was done just very recently. And it starts to look at the financial costs associated with losing data, as well as the productivity costs. Right? And losing data is associated with how long it's going to take to recover the data. So the total cost of downtime is going to depend on how long your systems are offline. How long is it going to take you to recover? It could be anywhere from seconds or minutes in the scenario where you have a great plan in place and a lot of automation, to hours or days or even weeks for some other systems. So taking into consideration the per hour cost, a single event can be devastating for a small or medium-sized business that lacks an effective disaster recovery solution. And just as there are financial costs associated with losing data, there are financial costs associated with recovering the data, getting back up and running. Remember, it's not just about plugging your server back in. It's about plugging your server back in, reinstalling all of the applications is necessary, verifying you have a consistent state, and making sure your employees are ready to go and start using that. So this is just a small chart here from some IDC data, third parties that we've worked with, that helps you quantify the cost of downtime. So these are some numbers that are validated and have been validated time and time again with different businesses that show it's not just about losing a few moments of time or a little bit of data. It's about the total cost of that impact on your business. And the numbers add up really quickly. And obviously, the more employees that you have in your business, the more users that are impacted by a data loss event or a downtime event, which means the more expensive it is for you. It's a lot more expensive to have 100 employees that aren't able to be productive for the day than it is to have 10 employees that can't be productive. So the larger your business, the more complex the scenario, the more you really need to think about the total cost of downtime in your business and how you prioritize mission-critical systems for fast recovery. So recovering is always the hard part. Getting the systems online, getting the data in that consistent state, resolving dependencies on networking and authentication, fixing hardware issues, maybe even reconfiguring users to point to a new environment that you've spun up. Most business owners expect this to take a few hours. Most IT people say it will take much longer, at least a day. So how do you resolve the discrepancy between business owners expecting 4 hours before recovery and IT is expecting at least 24 hours? You probably guessed it. You make your DR plan collectively, working together with the business owners and the IT professionals to collectively create a plan that's going to balance the system requirements with the business requirements to create a proper and thorough plan. So many of the IT admins that we talk about and that we survey, and here this is some data from Spiceworks that's been provided to us, have started to work on creating a DR plan, and many have implemented some sort of backup solution. Maybe an on-site backup, maybe an off-site backup, possibly using a hybrid approach, where you make both a local copy of the data and store an additional copy of the data off-site in a cloud solution. But not everyone's there in using these full solutions. And if you do have a backup in place, then you should schedule regular, perhaps annual reviews of your approach in combination with operations and business owners. Again, IT collaboration with business owners to come up with a suitable plan and make sure that you have the right solutions in place for the right systems. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment, and we're going to open up a poll through this webinar. This is a little bit of a way to make sure you're still awake here. And the poll should be popping up. And the poll really is a question of, for you and for your organizations, how many of you have a secondary data center where you have implemented some sort of solution to copy data or transmit data across to it? So I'll give everyone here just a few, maybe 30 seconds or so to fill this out, and then we'll kind of see. What's really interesting here is that, again, some of these survey data shows that different sized businesses have different requirements for how long they're willing to be down and how they sustain that. And over time, people have had to come up with creative solutions as to how to deal with that. And one of the historic solutions has been to say, well, I'm going to take my entire infrastructure or identify the mission critical systems, and I'm going to use a secondary data center, and I'm going to find some way to kind of spin up my services or utilize my applications in that secondary data center. But this is a very expensive solution, and it can be complex to implement in a lot of ways and maintain. And so a lot of businesses now are saying, hey, either I have a secondary data center and I'm looking for a simpler or more cost-effective solution for how I can implement and get the same level of disaster recovery without it, or saying I need to implement something, some sort of a disaster recovery solution, and I want to understand what are my options. So I think everyone can see the results here, and it does look like we have a significant amount of people here with a secondary data center, which is awesome and shows that a lot of you are making the investments necessary to understanding how to have a good disaster recovery plan and have a secondary option in sight. And so a couple of things that I hope you're kind of learning as we go through this and that we'll talk about as we go on is different options for how to have your disaster recovery plan without a secondary data center in place. So a secondary data center means that, again, you have all of this stuff replicated to another environment. But a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind with doing that is, one, how do you keep everything up to date in your secondary data center? You want to make sure that you have the right systems in place, the right processes in place, so that when it comes time to fail over to that secondary data center, everything is in sync and as up to date as you need it. Again, looking back to the RTO and RPO, how much data are you willing to lose when you move to your secondary data center? Perhaps only seconds of work, perhaps hours. And then another thing to look at is how to think about your secondary data center being in a platform as a service or being in a cloud-based solution. And thinking about this as opposed to always paying for the secondary data center, is there an option or an opportunity for me to leverage an on-demand cloud-based solution for my business? So we'll talk a little bit here about how to use the cloud for offsite data protection. So using a cloud-based backup and high availability solutions give you a lot of options and a lot of benefits. So first, with a cloud solution, you never need to worry about having a secondary copy of your data within the same danger zone, within the same area as the initial storm or the initial data loss event that's causing this. So you want to make sure that the data is securely stored in the cloud and that your backup copy will be safe. When using cloud-based solutions, you can even choose geo-replicated solutions so that your data is stored in multiple locations in the cloud, such as on both an East Coast and a West Coast data center. This way, if there's a weather event that you're contending with, or a flooding event, or any sort of localized event, maybe even a localized network outage, you'll know that your data is safely and securely stored in a different geographic area. So working with Carbonite means that you can present the problem, and our solution architects help with the solution. So maybe you're managing data protection on different systems, different hardware, different environments. You have different RTOs and RPOs for each system. So Carbonite architects can help design solutions for redundancy, high availability, hybrid backup, and everything to meet your needs. What's unique with Carbonite is the breadth of products from a single provider that can be combined to meet your objective. And we'll go through these products in more depth momentarily. Cloud DR solutions also enable you to run systems in the cloud for as long as required. For example, let's say that you need to replace hardware and it will take several days to get that ready. What do you do while you wait? If it takes longer than expected, what will you do? Cloud services will enable you to run your systems in the cloud infrastructure until you can get your system back up and running. It keeps your business running, at least in some capacity, until you have everything back as you like. By running in the cloud, it often means that you can access the systems from anywhere. For example, remote employees, or employees who can't access the main office, can likely access the data remotely and continue working. So perhaps people can't get into the office, but they can work from their home and access some of these critical systems remotely and still perform their job and keep your business running. Again, when you focus on mission-critical systems and identifying them into different recovery phases, then you can make sure that the most critical systems will be returned to service quickly and allow you to run in some limited capacity as quickly as possible, bringing on additional systems over time. And the cloud is faster, cheaper, and better. Seriously? Well, if done right, cloud technology does enable vastly more efficient and secure data transfers and storage, plus the remote recovery capabilities. There's no hefty upfront infrastructure costs. There's no more worrying if your backup tapes will get there in the aftermath of a storm or a disaster. It allows you to leverage all the benefits of on-demand infrastructure, a set-it-and-forget-it type backup mentality, but still have the ability to rely on it for your disaster recovery strategy. So let's think about this as hurricane-proofing your DR strategy, making sure that should that most severe incident happen to you and to your business, that you're able to recover, remain in business, and get back to running your operations as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So here are some things to think about for hurricane-proofing your strategy. So first, you need to make sure that you're testing your DR plans. I always recommend testing at least once a year, or more often, depending on the needs and the criticality of your business. A lot changes in a year. Most likely, systems have changed, infrastructure has changed, even some of your staff has changed since the last time you put together your plan or executed through it. So you should schedule a drill to ensure that everyone knows their roles, knows what critical systems need to be covered and which ones need to be recovered quickly. So testing this on a regular basis is one of the most important things you can do. I know when I was working with airlines and having an airline go down because of a weather event wasn't an option, we tested our DR strategies at least once every quarter, knowing that we could quickly recover and continue operations without having to, with minimal amount of downtime to get back up and recovered. So secondly is to prepare your staff. Make sure everyone knows what their roles are. What are the things that they own? Talk to people about what are their mission critical applications. Again, it can change from time to time. The billing system or the ERP system that someone used may have changed from several years ago to today. It's worth conversations and talking to your team and your staff to understand what's most important to them. How would they prioritize their systems? Who would they prioritize working on those if they had limited capacity? So third, ensuring that your backup site is secure and ready to go. You want to make sure that it's far enough away from your primary site that should something happen, you're not going to lose both your primary and your backup at the same time. So for example, having a secondary data center that's just several miles away means that it's going to be subject to a lot of the same issues as your primary, things that you want to avoid if possible, and things that the cloud can help solve as well. You want to make sure that the recovery site is always ready to go. It's got the right services there. It's got the right networking. It has all of the necessary components and dependencies. So think about this as authentication and login and all of the different systems and networking dependencies. As you make changes in your primary data center, you want to make sure that you have a plan in place for getting those changes installed with the secondary data center as well. You want your systems up to date and ready to go so that when you fail over to your backup site, you don't have to spend several hours patching the server or updating dependencies because it hasn't been maintained properly. And finally, you want to review and update your plan with lessons learned, especially every time you run a test. Things change, and you want to find ways to improve it. You want to talk to experts, industry experts, colleagues, other IT professionals, and learn from their best practices. Learn how they're continually modifying their DR strategy and their DR plan to meet the needs of their business. Look at new things that are available in the industry, cloud-based systems, new solutions, new replication technology. Stay up to date on everything that's going on so that you're always prepared and able to make the best decisions. So I've talked a lot about disaster recovery and creating a plan, and a part of that is really choosing the right solutions and the right technologies to enable each part of your business. And so Ray Sullivan here will start walking us through, or walking everyone here through, some of the different Carbonite solutions and products that we have that can help solve these problems and integrate into your DR strategy. So Ray, take it away when you're ready.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here and to talk through a little bit more of the specifics around how Carbonite can address some of the concerns that Jamie just walked us through. So just a quick overview first for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Carbonite or are not familiar with some of the ways we've built out our portfolio in the last couple of years. So we have over 26,000 customers worldwide. We've done over 100,000 successful data migrations. We have extremely satisfied customers and 20 plus years of expertise in data protection. So let's first just take a high-level look at what our data protection portfolio looks like. If we want to go to the next slide. So we have solutions for backup and disaster recovery and all the way up to high availability, depending on your needs. And again, what Jamie was talking about with your RTOs and RPOs. We have solutions that cover legacy systems, physical, virtual, and cloud. And if you think through, your IT environment, the idea is that we have solutions that can cover all of your various scenarios. So most people or most businesses have a mix of systems and potentially have different needs for different systems. It's unlikely that every one of your systems is going to be critical and need to go to the expense and complexity of a high availability solution. And so with Carbonite, we have a portfolio that will be able to address all of your different critical second tier and third tier needs. If you move to the next slide, Jamie. What we've found is that most IT environments have about maybe 20% of their systems are what they would consider to be critical. So this is where they really can't afford any downtime and they do not want to lose any data whatsoever. And then maybe you have some other systems that you don't use as often or aren't saving and making updates to as often, and so you can afford a little bit more downtime or have a different RTO for those systems. For the critical systems, you're obviously going to want an availability solution that allows you to have, real-time replication and maintain a copy of your data so that you can fail over and really lose no time and no data. So to that end, we'll start by going over Carbonite. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll start actually by going over our backup and disaster recovery solution powered by eVault. Next slide, Jamie. So our traditional backup and disaster recovery is a secure and easy to backup solution that basically has two flavors. We have cloud backup and hybrid backup. Cloud backup, as the name implies, saves a secondary copy of your data to the Carbonite cloud. Hybrid backup is essentially the same, only it provides an added layer of protection and increased backup and recovery speeds by saving data to a local Carbonite supplied appliance, and that also allows you to save both locally and have a redundant copy of your data offsite in the cloud. These backup solutions provide peace of mind that all of your business data is securely backed up. They support a wide range of platforms, including legacy systems. This is something really that I think is different about our product is the broad system support that we offer. And what we've found is that oftentimes these legacy systems actually contain very critical data, and that's kind of why they hang around in your data center, is because whatever you're using them for is so critical that you don't kind of want to mess with it. So you end up with a legacy system that has something that's very, very important to you. So it's very important to back up. We offer really flexible deployment options, support for physical and virtual environments, and we have geo-redundancy built in. So these two solutions really ensure that your data is always protected and that you have the flexibility to deploy really in a way that makes sense for your specific environment. So actually, let's take a look at the flexible deployment options and kind of how the product works. So we have the direct-to-cloud model, the hybrid backup model that I was talking about before with the on-site appliance. But again, one of the things that I think this product does really well is that we offer a lot of flexibility around remote office, branch office, so you can have an appliance at each of your offices and then at the central office, and then back that up to the cloud. The recovery options here are also equally flexible. You could recover from the cloud down to one of the remote offices or from the cloud to the central office. So lots of options here and lots of redundancy built in. Regardless of how you choose to deploy the solution, you can use the centralized web-based dashboard to easily configure and monitor the backups from anywhere in the world. We have image backup with bare metal restore and granular restore, which lets you recover files, folders, or entire servers really easily just by logging into the online portal and choosing your RPO and your target. However, if you have a system that you really can't afford even minutes of downtime and you want to protect data continuously and have the ability to fail over, we have Carbonite availability and migration powered by DoubleTake. These two technologies are essentially the same underlying technology. They're just used in a different, used for a different use case. So Carbonite availability really enables organizations to maintain the highest availability of their Windows and Linux servers by preventing downtime and data loss. And it does this using a continuous replication mechanism that basically maintains a secondary copy of the data without taxing the primary system or the network bandwidth. So Carbonite availability basically continuously replicates changes from the source environment to the secondary target anywhere in the world and keeps the copy of the data basically in sync so that any changes are transmitted in real time And this way, if a disaster strikes or if something happens on site, there's almost an instantaneous failover, and you have near zero downtime and zero data lost. Carbonite Move, which is our migration product, basically works the same way in that you have an initial seed, you keep the data in sync, only in this case, you're purposely failing over, right? It's not because you're having a disaster or a data loss event. You actually are purposely failing over once to get your data where you want it to be, and then the data's on the source target, and you don't ever actually have to fail back because it's moved to where you want it to go. Actually, if we go to the next slide, we can kind of illustrate how the product works. So you can see here, you have your primary system, and it is continuously sending changes over to the target system. And then if a failure happens, it can either be an automatic failover or a manual failover, depending on your settings. Basically, the target system comes up and running immediately, and in many cases, the users may not even realize that they're running on the secondary system because it's that quick. So in the event of, a disaster to one system or the entire data center, the failover to the secondary location can be easily invoked or automatically invoked, and users are rerouted within a couple of seconds. So I don't think I have an illustration of how the Carbonite Move product works, but it would essentially be the same scenario here, only instead of being a disruption, it would be that you choose the target of where you want to move this data to, and it makes it just a very seamless, takes what would otherwise be, a very, very manual process of moving data from one server to another, or from physical to virtual, virtual to virtual. This very flexible platform, and it basically allows you to move data from really any to any. So if you have a physical server and you really want to get it up into the cloud, or vice versa, this takes that and brings it down to about 100 steps, or even fewer, depending on your specific scenario. So that's pretty much the overview of our products, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So Ethan, why don't I hand it back to you so that we can get some questions going.
Great. Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Jamie, for those great insights on both DR strategy as well as sort of the rising need for us to be thinking about this and the increasing inevitability that a major disaster or weather-related event could be coming our way no matter where we live in the country. So all interesting stuff. Thank you for sharing that. We did have a few questions come in that I think are really good and would like to see if we could have answered. So I guess, Jamie, this first one might be a good one for you. It's basically looking at the location of the secondary data center or the co-located data center. How do you make sure that it's secure and in the right location in the event of a natural disaster, like a flood or a hurricane? Like, is there a standard number of miles apart that the secondary site should be? I mean, what are some recommendations there for where your secondary site should be and how maybe you should think about setting that up?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of standard documentation that would say make sure that your secondary data site is at least 100 miles from your primary. But I think that you also want to consider a few other elements of your business. For example, if you have offices on East Coast and West Coast, you might want to consider having a secondary data center that's closer to perhaps your alternate office, because then you might also have people and processes that can better integrate with that. And another thing to think about is different lines of communication, i.e. Networking type lines. So there's certain areas, for example, in the Northeast, where there's a lot of networking lines that all kind of work in some area. And so having a connection between Boston and New York, our secondary data center, might not actually be an advised option if, since they run on a lot of similar networking infrastructure. You might want to consider perhaps Boston and Indianapolis or something that's a little bit further apart. So that should anything happen to a networking line, you still have redundancy there. This is really an area where, depending on how your business is set up, typically, engaging some sort of expert to understand, you probably don't want to rebuild your primary data center. You're probably choosing a location for your secondary. Probably the problem you're trying to solve. And trying to help work with a data center location expert to solve that would be helpful as well.
Great. Another question came in that I guess either of you could answer certainly is folks are wondering, how do we know if remote data replication is right for their DR strategy? Is this even something that we should always be thinking about, or is it really better to start off kind of classifying applications and servers and data by criticality? Is that really the first step, or how can we sort of make a determination if sort of a double take type of technology is right for a DR strategy?
Sure, I can take this one. So kind of going back to the insight that we were talking about earlier, that not all systems are going to have the same criticality. So I think knowing when availability is appropriate versus just having backup. So backup, everybody needs backup for every system, but deciding whether you want to also have availability for that system, I think really comes back to the RTO. So can you afford any downtime? How much downtime can you afford? And how do you balance that with your budget? So, at the end of the day, really looking at, downtime for this specific server or this specific data is going to cost me, X amount per minute that we're down, or potentially even sometimes even calculating the cost is impossible because there are a lot of intangibles built into that. I mean, if your business depends on, being able to take web orders and you go down for an hour even, that could be a potentially huge hit to your business. So I think, when looking at backup versus DR versus availability, it really does come down to that RTO.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Here's an interesting question that we seem to get a lot whenever, I host these DR-related webinars is it, there's a lot of rise in outsourced DR or DRAS, as, it may be called in the industry. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of that? Is it better to outsource DR, keep it in-house? And if you are going to outsource, how can you ensure that the vendor is able to meet your RTOs and RPOs? And what are the kind of questions you should be asking of a DRAS vendor in regard to SLAs and things like that? Maybe we can touch upon that a bit.
Sure. So as far as questions to be asking, the first thing I would ask is, can I get a demo, and what level of testing am I going to be able to do? So Jamie talked about this a lot, how important it is to be able to test these systems and make sure that they're working, and not just that they're working, but that internally you are familiar and your team is familiar enough so that if something does happen, everybody can react quickly and everybody knows exactly what's supposed to happen in that instance. So I think, working with Carbonite, we would partner really closely with you. It's never going to be a thing where it's like, I'm outsourcing this so I don't need to know about it, or I'm going to kind of set it and forget it. We're very much a partner. And so, it would be, getting you set up, getting you installed, getting you trained up. We work on getting the run book, we work on that with you so that, again, if a data loss event happens, everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing and what the procedure is. So I would ask a lot of questions of your rep or of your vendor around, how to get set up and how to test your solution.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well, one of the questions there was around having a secondary data center yourself versus using perhaps a cloud DRAS solution. And one other thing to really think about is that to have a secondary data center and to maintain that and to use it as part of your DR strategy requires a lot of in-house expertise and a lot of in-house time and effort to keep that up to date. So think about having every server in both data centers. Now you have twice as much patching to do, twice as much network maintenance. It's a significant investment, both CapEx-wise to get it set up as well as an ongoing operational cost. With a cloud solution, a lot of times that's reduced, and the complexity of managing the secondary environment is pushed off onto a vendor. And so if you have the right vendor and the right partner to work with there, it can not only reduce the kind of upfront costs of implementation, but also the 20 or 30% of ongoing maintenance that you're doing on that data center from an IT, human resource perspective that you're investing. So just a couple of things to think about from kind of a total cost of ownership, maintaining the expertise and the people with the expertise in-house versus leveraging an outsourced vendor can also be a cost difference.
Great points, both of you. It looks like we are just about out of time for today. Just a few last-minute notes before we sign off today. Once again, want to thank Jamie and Ray both for their time this afternoon and the great insights that both of you provided on DR strategy, the different types of solutions you could implement to help with that, and all of the sort of interesting facts on weather-related incidents and how they're increasing. So great stuff. If anybody has any follow-up questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us by going to evault.com. Fill out the contact form there, and one of our technical experts will get back in touch with you. And even if you just want to spitball questions about DR strategy, they're happy to do that with you. Once again, the recording and slide deck presentation from today will be emailed out to everybody following the presentation, so you will get a copy of that, including the handout that's available, which is a nice kind of add-on to the webinar content today that just sort of outlines, some good steps on why you should think about a secondary or cloud-based solution. So with that, we'd like to thank everybody for attending today. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you on our next webinar, which is coming up on September 18th with Storage Switzerland and George Crump, which is going to all be about achieving BCDR Zen and all things DR and backup. So we hope you can join us for that, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.